Have you ever wished you could magically transform into something else? Something radically different, like a bird so you could fly somewhere, or change into a cheetah so you could run faster than you've ever run before. Maybe you've wanted to change into someone else. Maybe as you've grown, you found yourself transforming into all kinds of things, growing up, growing out, growing older. Our lives, like the seasons around us, are destined and designed for transformation. In this lecture, we're going to hear two stories about transformation. One about transforming objects around us, and the other about transforming ourselves into other creatures. Now, the first story may be better known to you as the classic story of The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Now, some really lovely music by Paul Dukas is based around this very old story. It's called The Sorcerer's Apprentice, and Dukas wrote it in 1897 as a symphonic poem. It's music that tells a story about transformation. The famous German writer Goethe also wrote a poem about this same story in the 1700s. And the story itself is much older than the music. It's from 1st century Egypt, and it goes like this. There once was a man in Egypt named Pancrates, and he spent 23 years underground learning magic from the Egyptian god Isis. And when he emerged from underground with this great wealth of knowledge in spells and magic, Pancrates, whenever he needed water carried, well, he never did it himself. Instead, he would get the wooden bar that locked the door, or the wooden handle of a broom, or even the wooden pestle that was used to grind the herbs in the kitchens. And he would take that stick, and he would put a shirt around its top, and pants on its bottom, and a little hat upon its head, and he would say 3 magic syllables, yip, yop, yup. And right away, the broom would spring to life and become, for all appearances, a man, dressed in a shirt, and pants, and a hat, who would draw the water and cook the meals and wash the dishes and so forth until, yum, 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 the magician said the magic words and whoop, the broom would clatter back to the floor again, no longer a man, but just a wooden stick with some clothes on it. Now, the magician was very learned, and he was very secretive. He wouldn't tell anyone, not even his closest companions, what his magic spells were. Until one day, a friend of the magician happened to overhear the magic words that Pancrates said to get that stick to come to life. And as soon as Pancrates, the magician, he was away, the friend took a wooden pestle and stood it up on its end, dressed it in a shirt and pants and a hat, and said the words, yip, yop, yup. And boing! The pestle, it jumped up, and the friend said, carry water into that jar. And soon enough, the stick carried in water and began to fill the jar. Good, good, now stop carrying water and be a pestle again. Ah. But he didn't say the magic words to stop the pestle. He hadn't overheard that part. And so the water came. The pestle filled and filled the jug until it overflowed and filled the house. Stop! Stop! But the pestle kept filling and filling the jar, and the friend, in desperation, he took an axe and he cut the pestle in two, at which point the 2 pieces of wood each began to bring in water. Now, twice as much water coming in at once until the water began to run out of the house and into the street. And at this point, the magician, Pancrates, came in that soggy room, and he saw what had happened, and he secretly said the magic words, yum, yum, yum. And immediately, the 2 splintered pestles splashed onto that soaked floor, and Pancrates quietly slipped away. And the friend was left in the middle of that watery room to think about his misdeeds. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just say some words and have the work around us magically done? Now, this sounds mystical and far-fetched, but the fantasy impulse to transform our surroundings is what helped us create and shape the world that you see in your very own living room. All the inventions, from the car you ride in and the air-conditioned home that you live in, to the device you're listening to these stories on, these are all just inanimate gears, animated into useful objects. They're sticks brought to life. Now, perhaps we enjoy transformation stories so much because we experience transformations in our everyday lives, in our bodies, and in ourselves all the time. Now, there's several times in life when we ourselves face radical transformation. Our voices change and deepen as we pass through puberty. We grow funny bumps on our faces. Some of us, unfortunately, never age out of this. We get taller, we grow hair in funny places, and then our skin gets baggy and saggy like an elephant, and we shrink. Life is full of transformations, and sometimes these transformations are not pleasant. Transformations are often pictured as spooky in stories, a scary witch who can change shapes, or the mysterious magician who can make things morph. Transformation has a kind of a spooky undertone in stories because we want to think of ourselves as stable, as unchanging people. We're dependable, we're reliable, we don't change. But have you ever felt just out of control with what your body is doing? Maybe you've had a broken leg or been ill. The truth is, stability is an illusion when it comes to our bodies. We're in a constant state of transformation. Now let's hear another version of The Sorcerer's Apprentice. And this is another long one, so just sit back, relax, enjoy it. It's a French tale about a boy who goes adventuring and learns quite a bit more than he bargained for. Once upon a time, there was a boy. And this boy was so happy because his head was filled with knowledge. He had been to school for 6 weeks. He was 12 years old. Been to school for, I know that's strange, isn't it? In France, this is what they did in this time. He was 12 years old. He had been to school for 6 weeks, and he knew how to read. Though his brain was very full, his belly was very, very empty because they were very, very poor. Their family was so poor they barely had enough food to fill their bellies for 1 meal a day. And finally, the father, he told the son, he said, "You must go and find work." And so the boy, he went out into the world. And as he was leaving their house, he took out a coat. Everybody take your coat. Pretend like you're taking your coat. He took that coat, and that coat was a special coat. It was red in the front, and it had a red lining, and it was white in the back. And he took that coat, and he put it on. He put on your coat. And he went out into the world to go and find work. And everywhere he went, he would knock on people's doors and go up to people. "Do you have any work? I need a job. Do you have any work for me?" No one had any work. He went walking. Down the road, he saw there was a mansion house. It was tall, and there was a tall tower. And in that tallest tower, there was a window. It was a beautiful window. And the window was open, and out of that window popped the head of a man. When he called down to the boy, and he said, Hey, you! What are you doing in these parts?" And the boy, he looked up. He said, I'm looking for work. Do you have any work for me?" "Do you know how to read?" Well, what? Did the boy know how to read? "Yes, oui, monsieur, I know how to." No, I will have no one in my house who can read. No. And he slammed that window shut with the boy. He went walking on. But he knew that he needed work. He needed a job. And he thought that man might actually have a job for him, so he had an idea. He took that coat off. Everybody take your coat off. That coat that was red in the front and what color in the back? White. And he turned it around so that it was white in the front and red in the back. And he went walking back by that big mansion house. The window opened. Hey, you! What are you doing in these parts?" "Well, I need a job. I'm looking for work. Do you have any work?" "Can you read?" What did he say? "No. Oh, no, monsieur. I cannot read." "Ah, you are perfect. Come up." And so the boy, he opened the door and he went up the stone steps up to where that man was. He opened the door and he saw, oh, that man was holding a plate of food. Oh, and his head was full of knowledge, but his belly was very empty. And he went, everybody eat the food. He ate all that food up. Now his head was full of knowledge and his belly was very, very full. And the man came over. He said, "You have one job. I will give you one job to do. You must go and go to my book. And the boy looked, and there was a large book sitting up on a pedestal. You take this duster, and you dust my book every day. I will be gone, and I will come back. That is your job. And I am off. And he went off. And for a year, that man was gone. And the boy, he took that duster. Everybody take your duster. He took that duster, and he would dust the pages of that book. But as he dusted the pages, he learned that this man who he worked for was no ordinary man. This man was a magician. And this was his book of magic spells. And as he dusted each page and turned each page, in that 1 year he read that entire book. And the man came back. You have done a good job. You stay a second year. I will double your wages. Now I am off. And he left. And the boy, in that second year, he took his duster. Everybody take your duster. And in that second year, he memorized the first half of that book, all of those spells. The magician, the man, he came back. You have done a good job. You stay a third year. I will triple your wages. I am off. And he left for a third year. And in that third year, take your duster, the boy memorized the second half of that book, all of those spells. At the end of the third year, the magician came back. The boy asked for his money, and he took that money home to his family. His family was so happy. Oh, they had all of that money, and they spent the money on food. They lived for many, many months until finally, as it often does, the money ran out. And so the father, he thought, I need to send my boy out into the world to work again. But the morning he was about to send that boy out, the boy said, No, Papa, no. I have a plan. You wait until tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning, you look out in the barn. There will be a horse. You take the horse out and sell the horse at the market, and then we will have money. Well, the father, he thought that his son had gone crazy. He knew that they were poor. They had no horse, but he said, oui, and they went through the day. They all went to sleep. The father woke up the next morning. He went out to the barn, and he thought he was going crazy. He saw a horse out there in the barn. Well, but he remembered what his son had told him. His son had told him, when you sell the horse, remember to bring back the halter. And he remembered that. And so he took the halter, and he led that horse all the way down into the town. And he sold the horse for a great price, and as he walked back, he brought back in one hand, he held the money, but in the other hand, what did he have? The halter. He remembered what his son had said. And he walked back, but as he was walking, he heard somebody else walking behind him. He turned around, and there was his own son. What are you doing? Papa, it was me. I was the horse. I will tell you. And he told him all about the past 3 years, how he had learned a magician's magic spells, and how he, from learning those spells in that magic book, he could transform into any kind of creature or thing that he could imagine. Oh, well, the father was happy. And they went out and they spent the money on food, and they lived off of that food for many weeks until, as it often does, the money ran out. And they were poor again. Papa, you go out into the barn tomorrow morning. You will find a cow. You go and sell that cow at the market. And you see, you go. But remember, you must take the rope that is around the cow's neck. You must remember to bring back the rope. If you do not, just like the halter, I will not be able to change back into a boy. You remember? Oui. So the next morning he woke up. He found the cow out in the barn. He grabbed onto that rope. Everybody grab onto the rope. And he led that cow out into the town. He sold that cow for a great price. He came back, and in one hand he held the money, in the other hand he held the rope, yes, that had been around the cow. And sure enough, he heard somebody walking behind him. It was his son. Papa, it was me. I was the cow. Well, this went on until the family started getting greedy. And then the boy started transforming into all kinds of creatures, horses and cows. And they sold those cows and those horses even when they didn't need the money. And one morning, man went out, and he saw a horse. Out in the barn, he picked up the halter. But he picked up the halter. He knew it was his son. And he went walking out to market. But that very same morning, that magician, up in his tower of that mansion house where he lived, He was looking through his magic book of spells. And those of you who don't know about a magic book of spells, the words will sometimes rearrange and move. And as he looked into that book, the words rearranged, and he saw the story of what had happened. He read that boy knew his magic spells. That boy, he has tricked me! I will get him. And he slammed that book shut. He took his cloak that was around him. Everybody take your cloak. He flung it around his shoulder, and he went down into the town. And the magician went down into town just as the father was taking that horse, leading that horse off into town. And the magician, he said, "Oh, you come. I would like to buy that horse off of you." Well, he took the father in, and he bought the father a drink. He bought the father another drink. And after a while, the father was walking back home with 2 handfuls of money, but no halter. And the magician, who had just purchased the horse, grabbed hold of that halter and said, "I have you now, you little boy. I have you. I will take you to the blacksmith. I will put shoes on your feet. I will put a nail through your mouth. You will never say another spell again." And so he led that horse down. He led that horse down over to the blacksmith. And the magician went inside to talk with the blacksmith about putting shoes on the boy's feet and putting a nail into that horse's mouth so he would never say another spell again. And he did not want to be a horse. He wanted to be a boy again. Well, right about that time, the horse, his halter had been tied around a post. There were 2 boys who came over, and they just leaned against that post, just talking to one another. And the horse, as those 2 boys came over to him, he leaned over to them and he said, "Untie me." What would you do if a horse started talking to you? You wouldn't do anything? That's exactly what those boys did. They didn't do anything. They just froze. And you know what he said? "Untie me." Well, this time the boys, a horse was talking to them. They untied it. Everybody untie. Everybody untie. And as soon as he had done that, as soon as that halter fell free, the horse, he shrunk down. He shrunk down, he grew fur, and he changed, boing, into a bunny. He transformed into a bunny, and he boing, 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 boing. He started to hop away. Well, right then, the magician came out from the blacksmith's, and he saw what had happened. "Oh, you boys, you. And he transformed those boys into dogs. And the dogs caught the scent of that bunny. And off the bunny ran. Everybody take your bunny. Off the bunny ran. Boing, 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 boing. And off those 2 boys, who were now 2 dogs, ran, chasing after that bunny. Very good. And then off the magician ran after them. So there ran the bunny. Everybody take your bunny. Boing, 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 boing. There ran the dogs. And there ran the magician, who could not run very fast, all the way down. So there they went, boing, 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 until they all came to a wide lake. And the bunny was hopping along. He was getting so tired. He came to that lake. He couldn't go around it. He couldn't go over it. And so, boing, he leapt. And as he leapt, he transformed. And that fur melted away off of those front paws, and it became scales. His neck opened up and became gills, and he became, whoop, a carp fish. And he swam and he swam. He said, I have escaped! I have escaped! And the 2 dogs, they came to the edge of that lake, and the magician, he said, I have you now. And he took those hands, everybody take your hands, and he clapped, and he transformed those dogs back into boys, and the boys went running away. And the magician ordered people to come to fish that lake clean. I have you trapped. Well, they fished that lake. They fished and they fished. They got all of the fish out except for the one carp that was the boy. He was darting, trying to evade their nets and their hooks. And finally, he took one leap out of the water. And as he did, those scales, they extended out into feathers. The gills opened up into wings, and he became a lark. And he went flying away. Oh, he went flying. Oh, very good. He went flying away. Oh, but the magician, he took that cape. Everybody take your cape. He flung it across him, and he became an eagle. And the eagle began chasing after the lark. Oh, and they dove through the air. And finally, the lark, he was getting so tired, and he spied a castle. Oh, he saw a castle, and he saw there was a chimney coming out of that castle. And he dove into that chimney. He went spiraling down. And as he spiraled down that chimney, he shrunk smaller and smaller and smaller until he became a tiny little grain of wheat. And he hit the bottom of that fireplace. Boom, 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 boom. There was no fire, there was no toasted wheat. But he went boom, 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 and went rolling across the floor and underneath the bed of a sleeping princess. Well, the boy knew he needed help. And so as that grain of wheat, he rolled out from underneath that bed. He transformed back into a boy. The girl was still asleep, but he went over. He got very close to her. He said, "Princess! Princess, please, wake up, princess!" And the girl, she opened her eyes and she looked. She heard. She couldn't see anything, but it was so dark in there, but she heard the sound of that boy, "Princess, princess!" And what would you do if you heard a strange sound in the middle of the night in your room? What would you do? The queen and the king, her father and mother, they came running in. What is wrong? There is someone in my home. I cannot see, but there's someone here. Well, they lit a candle and they looked. They searched high, they searched low. They couldn't see anyone. "You're having a nightmare. Go back to bed." They went away, shut the door. She pulled up the covers. She went back to sleep. Second time, grain of wheat rolled out. He transformed back into a boy. He said, "Princess! Princess! Wake up!" She woke up. He transformed back into a grain of wheat. They came in. "What is it? What is it? I heard someone else." They searched high, they searched low, they couldn't find it. "You're having a nightmare. Go back to sleep." They left. She went back to sleep. A third time, the grain of wheat rolled out. This time, he transformed and he stayed a boy. And he went an inch from her face. He said, "Princess! Princess, wake up!" She opened her eyes. What would you do?
Scream.
But before she could scream, he clapped his hand over her mouth. He said, no, princess, please, let me tell you my story. And then, if you do not believe me, then you can scream and bring in your parents. But he told his story about how he was being chased by a magician, how he was really just a young boy who was alone and scared and very hungry. And the girl, the princess, she believed him, and she felt sorry for him, and she even kind of started to like him. And so they decided that he would stay there in the castle, but he would stay as a secret. And so when morning came, he transformed into a ring that she took and she would wear around her finger. She wore him as a ring wrapped around her finger. And by day, he was the ring, and at night, he would transform back into a boy. They would sing, they would laugh, they would dance, they would talk, and in the daytime, he became the ring. Well, the magician, who didn't know what on earth had happened to this boy, he was back reading in his book. And he read, and as he read, those words, they rearranged, and he saw what had happened to the boy. The book told him. He said, I have you now. And he slammed that book shut, and he stuck his hand out that window. And just as he stuck his hand out, the king in that castle became deathly ill. And no other healer, no physician could heal that king. But the magician, he took his cape. Ready to take your cape? He flung it around him. And he walked over to that castle. And he knocked on the door and he said, I am the healer. I have come to cure your king. And he walked in, and of course, who had really cursed the king? The magician. So he walked in, and he healed the king. The king was so happy. He said, I will give you anything. What can I give you? What would you like? What's the one thing that he wanted? They're all I want. All I want is a ring that your daughter wears around her finger. Well, the boy found out about this plan, and that night he talked to the girl. Tomorrow morning, your father will ask you for the ring around your finger. You must give me to him, to give to that magician. But I have a plan. As you are taking off the ring, you must let the ring fall from your hand, and you see what happens. She agreed, and the next morning, he became the ring. She put that ring around her finger, and she went walking out of her room, and sure enough, the king and the healer, the physician who was really the magician, came walking by. Oh, my daughter. Oh, this man, he has healed me. All that he wants is the ring around your finger. It is such a small thing. You must give it to him, yes? And so she agreed. And she started to pull off that ring. Everybody start to pull off your ring. She started to pull off that ring. And the magician, he held out those greedy hands. He was about to, I have you. And she pulled off that ring. And just as she was, everybody pull off your ring. Just as she was about to place that ring in the man's hand, she let it fall. And as that ring fell, it burst into 1,000 grains of wheat. And those grains of wheat went rolling all across the floor. Well, at that very moment, the physician, who was really the magician, transformed into a chicken. And the chicken started to peck and to eat all those grains of wheat. Well, at that point, the grains of wheat started to roll together, and they rolled into a pile that became a fox. And the fox ate the chicken. And that was the end of the magician. And the fox transformed back into a boy. And by this time, as often happens in our adventures, the boy had become a man. He had transformed from a boy to a man. And he had fallen in love with the princess. And so he asked the king, "May I marry your daughter?" And the king, who had just seen his physician turn into a chicken and get eaten by a ring that turned into wheat and into a fox, he said, "Oui, oui." And the boy turned to the princess, "Will you marry me?" And what do you think that princess said?
Oui.
Well, this is a French story. And so she said,
Oui.
"Oui, oui." And that is the story of the doctor and his pupil. Stories about transformations give us an imaginative and entertaining way to see change as thrilling, as a moment full of new possibility. Transformations happen, and like the boy in the story, we find that through the course of our life's adventures, we grow into the people we were meant to be. Now, this story is an example of a rise story in folklore. The main character rises in power from a poor boy to become a prince. In the next set of stories in our transformation series, we're going to hear how Cinderella rises in power. But these stories aren't just about glass slippers. There's a talking cow, a tree that grows gifts, a house that sits on a chicken's foot, and much more. See you next time.